Hi everyone, I'm Margie O'Brien. Welcome to Legislative Insight. We are halfway through the 2016 legislative session, and joining me is Minority Leader Brian Newberry. Thanks for being here.
Hi Margie, thanks for having me on.
So how do you compare this to past sessions since 2008 when you were elected? How is the progress?
It's been a very different session. I've been joking publicly and privately that since we did the toll vote, which I opposed, the session's basically over. Obviously, technically it's not over. We still have to pass a budget, but most sessions have a rhythm where we come in early. Frankly, we waste a lot of time doing a lot of ceremonial things. But as the session moves on, issues come to the forefront that are, of importance or serious issues. And then by June, for better or for worse, we tackle some big issues and then we get out of town. This year, the toll vote was the major issue of the session. It's over, for better or for worse. It was done in February. And the budget doesn't look like it's going to be particularly controversial. Mm-hmm. Again, good or bad, I may or may not support it, but it doesn't look like it's going to have any major controversial items. So besides that, I don't see us tackling anything of major importance the rest of this session. Again, I'm not saying it's good or bad, but it's an odd feeling. It feels like we're just sort of marking time until the revenue estimates come out and we adjourn.
And some of what you've already dealt with just this year was left over from last year. We've been to a number of bill signings, which we thought was progress as far as the General Assembly getting something in front of the governor, the Good Samaritan bill.
Yeah, I mean, the end of last session was a little bit odd, and I'm still not quite sure what happened there. That was a House, Senate, Democratic leadership fight over silly stuff, frankly. There was some legislation that everybody sort of supported that kind of got left on the table in June. We've dealt with that. I'm not a big believer that just because the legislature does something, it means something good's happening. I think the government that does the least tends to operate the best. Mm-hmm. So I don't really care about getting bills in front of the governor. I care about either doing good things or, more importantly, sometimes stopping bad things. But I just don't feel like we're doing a lot the rest of the session. I'm not saying it's bad. I think a lot of the proposals that are floating around this building, like every year, are terrible proposals. So I'm glad that we're not acting on them. But you asked the question, it's an odd session. Okay. Even particularly in an election year. It's a very strange vibe in this building right now.
So the roadworks was handled early.
Yes.
In the season. You voted against it, but do you have any renewed sense of optimism about this?
About what?
About it moving forward? I mean, obviously, I think people can agree there's a need for fixing our roads and infrastructure in Rhode Island. Yeah. Now that a little bit more information about the plans are coming out, do you feel differently?
No, not at all. The toll bill was a disaster. It was a terrible piece of legislation. It was rushed through the legislature for political reasons. And I think the people who voted for it are going to come to regret that vote. Obviously, we need to do something in the infrastructure in the state. I've said publicly many times to give the governor credit for focusing attention on an issue that had to be dealt with that, frankly, past administrations and legislatures had not dealt with. We Republicans had our alternative proposals of pay-as-you-go. I suggested hybrid proposals. We could have taken some of the savings from the savings of the refinancing some of the prior bonds. There were other alternatives. They were not considered seriously at all. Instead, for reasons that I can guess at, but I'm not going to get into it, I would be speculating, the bill was pushed through. Now you hear talk about they're going to take the old Seconic entries and put them up somewhere, saying get the legal challenge going early, which actually makes sense, by the way. I'd rather have the legal challenge resolved one way or the other before we waste even more money. And by the way, you're not seeing a single bridge fixed right now, because even if this plan goes through, it's going to take a few years to set up. Right. So no, I am not. I do have no optimism about the toll plan whatsoever.
It was interesting to me to hear how, the main topic of the conversation this session has been jobs in the economy, and how this infrastructure idea does play a big role in that. That companies look towards better infrastructure if they're going to relocate.
Oh, yeah.
Other existing companies look for better roads and conditions if they're going to expand. So it does play a role. It was interesting and probably important that the governor did focus on this.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Like I said, the debate was not whether to do something. The debate was how to pay for it. That was the debate. How do we pay for something that has to be done? Ironically, our proposal would have had jobs and construction up and running sooner. So if you really want to focus on jobs and the economy, you should have adopted the Republican proposal. Not the toll proposal. It's going to get tied up in court. It's going to take years to implement. But I digress on that.
All right, let's talk possible revenue. The idea of being first in New England for having legalized marijuana. How do you stand on that?
Well, I've been the lead co-sponsor on the legalization bill for most of my tenure here, I think going back to at least 2011, possibly earlier. It's an interesting issue to me because, number one, I think it's inevitable. I think you can see the trends across the country. You can see the public opinion polling. I think it's going to happen inevitably in Rhode Island and probably nationwide eventually. It may well be on the ballot in Massachusetts this fall. If Massachusetts legalizes it, we're going to have hardly a choice. It's going to be impossible to keep it out of Rhode Island if it's legal in Massachusetts. So I favor doing it. I favor doing it for a lot of different reasons. Revenue is only one of them. But if it's going to happen, I'd rather see us get ahead of the curve and do it ahead of Massachusetts and the other New England states.
Because there are benefits to being first.
Oh, absolutely, because then you can become maybe the center of some of the industry parts of it. What I'm hearing, the vibe I'm hearing here is that for political reasons, they want to put it on the ballot as a non-binding resolution this year, not because we don't know what the result will be, it'll pass, but because they want to drive people to the polls that they hope will vote Democrat in the fall. But that's politics. As far as the issue itself, I think generally people support it. As the league co-sponsor, I've had not a single person that I can think of. I mean, maybe I'm forgetting somebody. If I am, I apologize. But I don't think I've had a single person in my district ever reach out to me and be critical of me for doing that. I've had lots of people in support. I've had very, very few negative comments at all from anyone, and no one from my district. So I don't think it's the political hot potato people think it is.
Is it your impression, too, that we as a state could learn from maybe missteps of other states that have done this and do things better here?
Yeah, actually, I will say this. I'm not an expert on what's going on in other states, but I know from talking to folks, including people in this building who've studied the issue. For example, Colorado implemented it one way, Oregon's implemented it another way. Again, without being too specific, because I'm not an expert in the area, I understand the Colorado model has been fairly effective. The Oregon model has been a bit of a disaster. And so we can learn from the way other states have done it, which is good for Rhode Island. If we're ahead of the curve, but we're not first, we can avoid some mistakes in the process, too. It'd be nice.
And, the conversation has been that, as you said, it's coming. So why not get out in front of it? And there are going to be other costs, the social costs. But again, if you can be proactive in that, I think Rhode Island could do that well.
Yeah, well, the social cost, I mean, as anybody who's in high school in Rhode Island can tell you, including my own children, it's a lot easier to get marijuana that's illegal than alcohol that is legal. There's obvious reasons for that. Alcohol is controlled and regulated, marijuana is not. That's part of the reason. Those social costs already exist. We already have the social costs of marijuana, so we're turning a blind eye by saying, well, it's illegal, therefore we don't have to worry about it. I don't buy the social cost argument. I think those can actually be dealt with more effectively if you legalize it, which is one of the reasons I support it as well.
And you said earlier that you don't think that this is going to be a controversial budget. Last year, were you surprised that it went through rather unanimously?
No, because once we Republicans made the decision internally we were going to support it for a variety of different reasons, that meant that we also weren't going to maybe cause trouble for it on the floor, which speeds up the debate.
Sure.
Also, you don't have as many, within the Democratic coalition last year in this building, there wasn't as much friction for a variety of different reasons. People had, sometimes people want to make political points on a budget, good or bad. I mean, I've done it. But if you're not in the mood to do so, then it speeds up the debate on it. Sometimes you will oppose something in a budget and you can make a big stink about it. You can put in amendments and you can draw public attention to it.
Right.
Or sometimes, as in the case of the Commerce Corporation initiatives last year, I voted for the budget, so I supported those in that sense. But I did vote against those articles to make a point, and I think I may have stood up and said that, but I gave like a 2-minute speech and I sat down. That's what made it go through quickly last year. Other years, there's been floor fights over all kinds of things from left, right, and center.
And give me a sense of what that's like. I mean, the building's going to be hot. It's going to be June. You're here late at night. Do tempers get the best of people?
I've seen tempers get the best of people here in the past. 2013 was by far the most controversial year I've been here. We got done on July 3rd, actually July 4th at 3 in the morning. That was Gordon Fox's last year as Speaker before, the fallout the following year. And we had 7 straight days of 90 degrees plus. Wow. And the tempers definitely got the best of people. I remember actually the one time my entire tenure here yelling on the floor, and it wasn't even on my microphone. That's a whole other story for the day. Last year didn't have that. There's been a better relationship in general. I'm not talking about individual relationships. There's always that. But there's been better relations in this building during this 2-year tenure for a variety of reasons. A lot of it having to do with personality. Some of it having to do with, policy differences not being as sharp. I think the toll bill has strained those relationships. I think that being an election year always strains those relationships. That's not new. So this year's been more not as kumbaya, shall we say, as last year. But it's still been a better tenor in the building than my previous 3 terms here have been.
All right, so the budget should go well. There are a couple other bills
Go
that I do
well. Hey, what do you mean by
go well?
go well?
Well, the fact that there is support for some of the initiatives that the governor's put forth, and one of the things
Well,
I
the
did
support
want
from
to
the Democrats, yeah. I suspect I won't be supporting the budget. I don't know. I haven't seen the final version. I don't care for the governor's version of it. But what I said earlier was, I don't think it's going to be hugely controversial. In other words, I don't think people are going to win or lose elections over what is in this year's budget and whether one supports or opposes it. In the past, that's been a different issue. So I don't think it's going to be a controversial budget. It doesn't mean it's going to be necessarily a good or a bad budget. There's a difference there. That's what I'm saying.
I know you've been outspoken about the education plans,
Yes.
some that the governor presented, others that's just in legislation. I just wanted to get your feel about a couple of things. The school choice idea?
That just came out, about a week ago?
Right.
I actually haven't had time to really study that yet. The problem with all these issues, charter school, school choice, they have all these buzzwords. Until you understand the details of a plan, you really can't give an informed opinion on it. For example, charter schools are a good example. Everyone talks about charter schools and are you pro-charter school or are you anti-charter school? I'm neither. I have 2 kids that go to charter schools.
Oh.
I have my daughter who's in college now who graduated from North Smithfield High School, obviously not a charter school. There's different kinds of charter schools. And there's the issue of how do we fund charter
Right.
schools and where do the kids come from and are we setting up parallel school districts within systems? For example, a charter school that specializes in a particular area of education that you can't really get in the traditional public schools and that draws students from a wide geographic area is one thing. And I don't know anybody that's opposed to that kind of school.
Because it's offering something they couldn't get
It's offering
right in the
something they
public schools.
can't get anywhere, and it's also not hurting a local district. The argument that I made in the specific issues with the mayoral academies, and the reason that I was in support, I have voted for the charter bills that we've passed in the House twice now, and they still hung up with the Senate and the governor, is the mayoral academies, which when I first got elected seemed like a good idea to me. But if you look at them now, and a specific one that affects my district, the Rise Academy in Woonsocket. Obviously, the kids that go there, it's a good benefit for them.
Sure.
All right? And you don't want to say, oh, look, we want to hurt those kids and their ability to get an education. Nobody wants to say that. On the other hand, the Rise Academy in Woonsocket is slated, based on its plan, to take 20 kids per class per year from the North Smithfield School District. Our high school in North Smithfield graduates each year about 130 kids. There's about 500 total kids in a high school. 20 kids per year is 80 kids. You take 80 kids out of North Smithfield High School, you got the same building, same costs. It's not just the finances, it's the educational opportunities. You remove 80 kids, you're talking, what is that, about 1/5 to 1/6 of the student body? What kind of impact does that have on the other kids? That's what I mean about parallel school districts. And that's why I say people talk about charter schools, and you read the blogs, and you read the sound bites. You can't talk about it that way. You've got to be very specific and talk about which types of charter schools, in what areas, what are they going to do, how are you going to fund them, where are the kids going to come from, what impact does it have on the other districts, et cetera. It's a very complex issue.
So would you favor bills that look individually rather than the idea of no expansion or no new creation? Sort
Yeah.
of that blanket idea.
Exactly. I mean, the bills I voted for are much more of what you just described. They're much more put a blanket moratorium on them. And I voted for those bills because I would say they're the only option available right now to put a stop to what I think is a serious problem. But I don't think they're the best solution. I think we need to look at each school individually, each plan individually. I said it's a complex issue. And the same thing goes with the school choice, which gets wrapped into it.
Sure. All right, so we just rolled out a botched tourism campaign. The governor has admitted it. It's gone back. Do you have a slogan idea for Rhode Island?
I don't have a slogan idea, but what a fiasco that was. I was flabbergasted by that. I thought the slogan was stupid. I didn't like the logo, but I could have lived with the logo. I understand it's a matter of taste. I get that. I don't know how they could have done it so badly. It really says a lot about the potential competency of the Commerce Corporation and of the administration itself. And what bothers me is, if we're going to give money, and this is part of the reason I voted against these funds last year, even though I did support the overall budget, you got to have trust in the competency of the people going to spend the money. And I've seen no reason to believe that the Commerce Corporation is competent at all to do anything. So I personally don't want to give a single dollar to the Commerce Corporation for anything. Does that mean the state government shouldn't spend money on a tourism campaign? No. There was an article they talked about, we were sitting here in the finance room when the Commerce Secretary came back for the hearings about a week ago, and it was kind of muted response here, and the press said, well, the House Finance Committee seems predisposed to support giving more money for the tourism campaign. Yeah, I'm predisposed to give money for a tourism campaign too because it's good for the state, but it's got to be run by competent people. And I want to see an administration that shows me they know what they're doing. And I haven't seen that. So.
Do you feel, though, now there is more pressure that the next, excuse me, the next part of this has to be just spectacular?
Well, of course there's more pressure, but it was so ridiculously bad. I mean, forget the Iceland thing, okay? The website had how many typographical errors, it identified dead people, it listed restaurants out of state. I mean, how on earth did that get through? All you had to do was give it to one person to review that knows Rhode Island at all. And they would have picked out half that stuff. It took 24 hours for the press and everybody else to pick it apart. I don't know. I don't know what to say about that.
How about the overall voice in Rhode Island? Do you feel that more people are positive, wanting to change the state, or do you think the negative voice overshadows that?
Well, when you say the negative voice are people who want to change the state. So,
They pick every positive thing that is being introduced to change the state. They pick it. I mean, no one would have been 100% unanimous saying, wow, this logo's fantastic. There would have been the naysayers. I understand that they got more fodder just to play with cooler and warmer. But do you think that minority voice, perhaps, the negative voice, hurts Rhode Island?
I think that my Democratic colleagues, including the Speaker of the House, sometimes like to think that any opposition to their policies is negativism. The problem is this state's government has given its people, over the years, all kinds of reasons to be negative. Now, in my tenure, I've been here for 8 years. Do I think the state of Rhode Island's government operates better than it did when I came into office? Yes. Do I think that we in the legislature have done some positive things for the state? And do I think the positive things that we've done in my tenure as a representative, whether I had responsibility or not for them, have outweighed the negative things we've done? Yeah, I do. I think we could have done a lot better. So does that make me a negative person? I think sometimes those who hold political power, and I'm not trying to single out anybody. I think this is true of anybody. I think it's true of Republican members here too. I think it's very easy to fall into the trap of being in a bubble. When you're in this building, you hear the echo chamber within the building. And so when you hear criticism from outside and you know things that the people on the outside don't know, you sometimes listen to criticism and say, wait a minute, that's not fair. You got to stop and look and say, wait a minute, how does what we do in this building look to the general population? Oftentimes it looks very poorly. And some of that is PR and how we communicate ourselves, and some of it's substantive in what we do. The toll plan was received badly by the public because it's a bad plan that was clearly forced through for political reasons. I'm not saying there aren't countervailing arguments, but that's the public perception of it. It's an accurate perception. So to just say, well, opposition to the toll plan is just people being negative, that's sticking your head in the sand. So the people of Rhode Island have every reason to have a negative perception of their government. It doesn't mean that everything that they criticize their government for is a valid criticism. I've said to people back home in my district for years now that sometimes the things that people complain about that go on up here aren't the things they should be complaining about. It's sometimes the things they don't know about that they should be complaining about. And our job, to me, as elected officials in this building is to try to figure out what really needs to be fixed, focus on that, and then try to go back to the people in the district and say, look, these are the real problems. You agree with me, let's focus on these, but let's not worry about these other issues that the press likes to play up,
Sure.
but aren't really the valid problems we need to deal with.
All right. Well, as I said, we are halfway through the legislative session. I'd love to have you back on before we get to the middle of June.
Oh, anytime.
Best guess that we're going to be wrapping up the session?
June 15 is my prediction.
All right.
We'll see if I'm right about that.
We'll see. Okay. Thank you very much, Minority Leader Brian Newberry. And thank you all for joining us for Legislative Insight. I'm Margie O'Brien.